Welcome. This is a review of test 3. We're going to talk about the ideas behind the answers before we see the answers. So first question says declare an array P, initialize it to the first 5 prime numbers. So you need to know what the prime numbers are. Prime numbers are positive integers starting at 2. So it's the number 2. And these numbers are divisible only by themselves and 1. That is, they do not have divisors other than themselves. So it's 2, 3. 4 is divisible by 2. 5 is not divisible. 6 is divisible by 2 and 3. 7 is not. 8 is divisible by 2. 9 is divisible by 3. 10 is divisible by 2. 11 is divisible by 11. So the numbers that we want to initialize are that. So now we need an array called P. What data type is this? This is integer. So the answer has to say, oh no, dang it, I do hate this. It has to say, just write it up here, has to say integer, the name of the array, P, the fact that it's an array, how many values, 5. What are the values? You have figured that out. So it's this list of values, like a set of values. 2, 3, etc. Dot, dot, dot. Semicolon. So that's the answer to the first one. All right. Is that clear? So let's erase. Yeah, this is a big mess. This is. Oh, what a mess. This is taking too long. Did not mean for it to take this long. All right, second, an array S contains 27 values, and I want to display the first, the middle, and the last. If it has 27 values, what are the subscripts? 0, 1, 2, and the last one is a 26. Those are the subscripts. So we want to do the first one that has this subscript. This one has this subscript. So the question is, what's the subscript of the middle one? Well, it's really the subscript in the middle. So if I take 27 actually, divided by 2, I get 13. 27 divided by 2, it's an integer, so that gives you 13. So 13 is the middle one. So I just want to output S sub 0, S sub 13, square brackets, and S sub 26. Right? Sometimes when you're given a large number of values, you notice that this is odd. So just solve the problem as if it was 5. Because if it was 5, it would be 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is the end, this is the beginning, and the 2 is in the middle. How do I get 2? I take 5 and divide it by 2. So that's that. All right? This is taking too long, taking too long, taking too long. Oh, wrong thing. Don't mess with me. Okay. All right. Now, notice that this problem did not say declare S. So don't do things that you're not asked to do. All right. Problem 3. A is an array of integers representing attendance at 117, home games at FAMU. What's 117? It's the number of values that you have in the array. Okay. Name of the array is A. Okay. And what's important? You have an array. What kind of values goes into the array? It's the attendance. What's the attendance at a ball game? Is it 3.5 or is it whole numbers? It's whole numbers. So you know, you're not asked to do this, but you know that the array attendance looks like is an integer array. It's called A, and the capacity of it is 117. That you know. But that's not the problem. The problem says write the code to compute the total attendance for this period. What does that mean? The total of the 117 games, what's the total attendance? What's required? You must add up all the numbers in the array. We did that in class numerous times. What's the heart of this? You have a variable called sum that has to be 0. And what else? You need a for loop that will go through this array. What's the for loop going to say? It's going to start at 0. It's going to say less than 117. And you're going to say plus plus. That's what the for looks like. Don't make me mad. 4. Boom. It's going to look like that. Those are the 3 parts of it. Right? And what's the body of the loop going to say? It's simply going to say add every element. So we're going to say k equals 0. So the body is going to say sum. This may not work too good. Plus equals a sub what? K, whatever your subscript is, a sub k. Right? And that's all you have to do. I did not ask you to declare the array, but you ought to know from the facts of the problem that you have an array of 117 things. You ought to know from the facts attendance is a whole number. All right? And the goal is to compute the total attendance, which is just adding up all the values. All right? I got to speed this up somehow. I'll be 83 by the time I finish doing this. But you really have to take the time to read the problems carefully. All right? What does this problem say? Two-dimensional array, the name of it is XX. What about it? 17 rows, 9 columns. It can hold numbers like 18.85, 44, minus 188. What data type is this? This is a float. So you know it's a float. It says do not initialize the array. It holds 17 times 9 values. I don't want you to try to put values in there. So what do you have to declare? It's a float. What's the data type? What's the name? XX. It's an array. How many rows? 17. How many columns? 9. And that's all you're required to do. That's all. All right. I'm tired of writing. I'm going to just speed it up right now and just go through these. If I show you the answer too soon, you'll forget the process. Process is more important than the answer. So I may just have to pull in here because I'm all right, we're going to try something else. Now, Complete the body of a function to write the values of an array to an output file. Name that. Oh man. Output file. We want to do the body of a function, and the purpose of the function is to write the values in an array to an output file. First of all, is this not the same problem as displaying the values on the screen? It's the very same problem. So I'm tired of fooling around. Let's just go ahead and pull this joke out here. Pull this whole thing out here so you can see the answer. All right? So what's required? Well, when you get inside the function, you have an array called A, and its size is A size. Because I'm writing to a file, I got to open the file first. Then I do my loop, then I close the file. Okay. The function has to open the file. All right. Next question. Write the prototype for a function that returns a maximum of 4 numbers. What does that mean? The function XX returns something, the maximum of 4 whole numbers. So what's the importance of this? The function must take 4 values. What kind of values? Whole numbers, so they're integers. It's going to return the biggest of these. So what's the data type that's being returned? Integer. Okay. It's got to be passed 4 values, A, B, C, and D. It's a prototype, so we've got to end this with a semicolon. Okay? Now let's take a look at this. Write the prototype for the function ZZ, given examples showing the effect of calling the function. First of all, what do you note? When I call the function, it does not return a value back to me. So therefore, the return type of the function must be void. The name of the function is ZZ. When I make the call, how many things are being passed? X is a float, U is a float. So I'm being passed 2 floats. Now this is where you must pay attention. Before I make the call, U is 8.8, X is 52. After I make the call, the value of U has changed. It has changed from 8.8 to 5.2. What does that mean? It means that the function must be allowed to change the value of U, which means that in the prototype you must say that the second parameter is passed by reference. You got to put the ampersand there. Okay? This is going way too slow. All right. Hope we're on. Everybody's tight. I'm not sure I'm going to do the second one. I think I'm getting too tired. Got to live with the first one. That's all we can do. Okay, go down. Now, it says here, write code to declare an array named Florida Teams and initialize it with Jags. What is Jags, Dolphins, Bucks, and Rays? Those are the names of the teams. What data type is that? It's a string. So we need an array. The data type is string. The name is this. How many values do you have? 4. I gave you 4 values. What are those values? They must be string values. So I've got to put a double quote around each, because these are string values. Okay? Done. All right. We have 2 arrays now, A and B. One contains 74 values, the other 32. Now, here are some functions. For the class, for the 330 class, I left out this function. I should have had this function in here. It would have made your job easier. All right? Now, complete code to determine and display the smallest of all the values in the 2 arrays. What does that mean? Of the 2 arrays, you got to find the smallest one in A, the smallest one in B, and then decide which of those two is the overall smallest. So we need variables, minimum of A, minimum of B, and the overall smallest. So how do we get the minimum of A? Call the function min. You have to pass it an integer array. But we said A is an integer array, and we know how many elements it has. So we're going to get the minimum of A, then the minimum of B. And then the smallest is the result of calling the function smaller, passing it these two results. The smallest one in A, smallest one in B, the smallest of those two is what smallest is. Because these functions return values, we could have called it a different way. We could have said, call this and get the smallest one in A, and then the smallest one in B, and then determine which is smaller of those two. If you don't use smaller, you can just get the two mins, and if min A is less than or equal to min, just say the overall min is min A. Otherwise, it's the min B. Losing my voice. Now, declare an array suggested by the code below. If this is the loop to go through the array, the subscripts will go from 0 to 1844. How many values is that? If I went from 0 to 3, how many values would that be? 0, 1, 2, and 3. So it would be 4 values. So how many values are in the array? It's this number plus 1. So there are 1845 values. So when I declare this thing, I will say I need capacity of 1845. All right, write the header for the functions below. Let's take a look at the calls. Well, first of all, we say the first call I have 3 parameters. Second call I have 3. The next one I have 3. And the next one I have 2. All right. So this is an example of a function that can have a variable number of parameters. And we discussed in class the mechanism for doing that is to have a default parameter. All right. So this function takes 3. It is possible to omit the third one. So the question is, if I omit the third one, what value must I use for must be the default value? What must be the default value? Let's take a look. If I call it with these 3 numbers, what happens? Okay, I display 6. So somehow I take 5 and 4 and 3 and I make a 6. Well, you might get better insight here. If I call it and the third number is a 3, the third argument is a 3, what's the answer? I called it with y, which is 4, z, which is 3, and it produces the number 7. So it looks like I'm adding these 2 numbers, and then I'm doing something with the third thing. The next call says I'm calling it with the same first 2 parameters. This gave me a 7. When I call it with the third parameter being 2, I go from 7 to 5. What does that mean? It looks like I've taken the sum of y and z, which would have been 4 plus 3, which would have been 7, and I must be subtracting the 2 from it. So it looks like when I omit the parameter, I get the same value as I got up here. When the parameter was a t, I get the same value when I omit it. So it looks like the default parameter must have been a 0. And that's all this was asking. It also says, what's the body? The body says, what are you doing to produce the answer? And as we saw, I'm adding the first 2 parameters, then I'm subtracting the third. All right? All right, that required some paying attention. All right, let's go and knock this out. All right, let's do the trace. Now, This is going to be a long video, my goodness. Okay, this has a static variable. All you need to worry about is a static local variable is still a local variable. It really has no impact on the trace. Is that clear? It may impact the values you return, but it has no impact on the trace. So we start the main 5, 6, 7. At 7 we call the function, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. And the function returns back to 7. That's the first call. Then we move to line 8. There's a call on line 8, and we come back to line 8, and then we do line 9. That was worth 5 points. Okay? Now, what value is returned? Well, when on the first call, the variable all is 0, and I'm passing it a 2. So I add 2 to all and I return all. So the thing that gets returned is a 2. So 2 is stored in sum. Okay. Next call. When I enter the function, all is a 2 because the last time I left this function, all was a 2. And I'm passing a 5. So what are we going to do? We're going to add the 5 to all, or we're going to add 5 to 2, and that becomes a 7. Right? And that's the value we're going to return. It's a 7. All right? And finally, is that all? That's not all. Doggone it. This is taking too long. I regret this. Okay. Next time, what's going to happen? The thing most of y'all kind of fell apart on was when I make the call in line 7. I make the call, and this is the first call. Right here. It ends here. Then I immediately make the second call, and that call is from here to here. Okay? And if you pay attention to the value, first time I call it and I pass it a 5, so the value of all is a 5 and a 5 is returned. So that's like 5 comes here. When I call it the second time, C is 8. I add 8 to 5, which is a 13, and that's the value that gets returned is a 13. So it's the 5 and the 13 that get added together to produce 18. But you have 2 calls from the same line, and you got to make those calls. Most of you never realized you had a second call. All right. Now, design and write a function named small that returns the smallest value in an array. Okay, I didn't say int, but it could have been any data type. It's going to return an integer. It's going to take an integer array, and when you pass an array, you pass the size. And just like we did it in class, you need a local variable, set it to the first value, and then go through the array. And change the minimum as you need to, and return the minimum. Now this is something I didn't want you to go crazy on, but most of you did. Here's a character array, and that's what a C string is. But a character array is just like an int array. So I have the ability to look at every element in the array, every character, and I can compare it. So this says, count the number of times the character A appears. So I have a counting problem. I set it to 0. I've got to walk through the string. The length of the string is line length. I've got to go through that and compare character by character. If I start with the first element, if it's an A, I want to count it. Then I do the second element. If it's an A, I want to count it, and so forth. So that's the code for that. Okay, with that, I'm going to pull up, and I hope this shows you that you're very close to getting this right. Okay, that's all.